Hello, this is Ivana.
This is Yao.
And you're listening to the podcast Life in Black and White.
And all the shades in between.
We share all things life, relationships, marriage, parenting, race, and much more. If you enjoy listening to us, then please follow or subscribe to this podcast. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook under Life in Black and White. Hello, my friend, and welcome back to the podcast Life in Black and White. This time we're recording during the day. We usually do this in the evenings, and I feel so much better doing it during the day. What about you?
I'm supposed to have a lot more energy, but we'll see how we kind of go now. But no, seriously, I am energized. Thank you, obviously, the guests and stuff that we've got. I'm energized, and I've heard a little bit about what what's involved in this particular podcast, and that's given me enough energy to kind of at least see me do this. So definitely looking forward to this.
Yeah. So let's introduce our guest right away. I thought we'd have a little chat first, but I got the hint.
No, I would.
you have enough of me.
It's only 12 o'clock during the day, so let's go.
I got all day for you. Yeah. So today we have a very, very, very special guest here, an amazing, strong lady, Florence, who's been through, when I say a lot, it just doesn't give it justice, no? So I'll just let her introduce herself. She's an author, an amazing lady. She just released the second book, and I would love her to introduce herself and to tell us about her and her work. Over to you, Florence.
Hi, I'm Florence Ọlájídé, and I am an educator. That's the term that I use to describe myself, because I've worked in all the different levels of education, both internationally and here in the UK. I'm also an author. I'm married to my lovely husband for, I think, 43 years now.
I want to get back to it later. Sorry, go on.
3 grown-up children and 2 granddaughters.
Oh, wow.
Kind of semi-retired at the moment. That's the term I used to describe myself. I'm not sure that I could ever completely retire, but that's where I am at the moment. It's a pleasure for me to be on your podcast. So thank you so much for inviting me.
We thank you. Yeah. So let's talk about you and your life first. Let's talk about your childhood and growing up.
I was born in London in the 60s, and I was one of a generation of children who were privately fostered by white families. And you may have heard of the documentary that's, I think it's been in circulation now for almost, I think just over a year, called Black Child and White Nanny, Black Child. It's about a phenomenon that took place in England in the 50s and 60s, which for some reason has sort of went into obscurity. And it's only recently that it's become a more well-known story. Our parents were students here in the 50s and 60s when Nigeria and other West African countries were still British colonies. So they came into the United Kingdom as British subjects to study. My parents came from a Nigerian background, from the tribe known as the Yoruba. And within, in terms of cultural norms, it was quite normal. And it's a cultural expectation that once you get married, the next stage of life is to produce children. So the concept of family planning wasn't one that was culturally accepted, and wouldn't be for years and years and years, right into my adulthood. So when our parents came, most of them were self-funding, which meant that they had to work in the evenings and study during the day, and yet they were having babies. And so childcare became a difficult thing. And I believe it was in the late 1950s that the first advert went into a nursery magazine seeking a carer who could look after a child. And that's where it started from. And soon it became, it was word of mouth. It wasn't regulated by any of the authorities. Parents basically hooked up with white families who were willing to take their child in, and the parents paid for the service. Yeah. So there's a whole, the number estimates range from 3,000 to about 50,000. Nobody knows exactly how many children were involved in this, but a lot of children were involved in it. And I know dozens. So I went to live with my foster parents when I was about a year old. And I lived with them till I was about 6. I saw my parents occasionally, sometimes weekends. Sometimes they'll come and visit me for a day. So I knew my parents and knew who they were. But my foster parents were my caregivers on a day-to-day basis for as long as I could remember. Then when I was about 6, my parents finished their studies and were ready to go back to Nigeria, which by then had gained its independence. So then I went to them for a weekend, and basically they did not let me go back to my foster parents. So from that moment on, I stayed with my parents for a few weeks before we then moved to Nigeria, where I found myself immersed in an alien culture to all intents and purposes. I didn't speak the language. And what was fascinating, of course, was that everywhere I went, they called me Oyibo, which is the Yoruba word for white man. So I found that puzzling. But to cut a very long story short, I really struggled to integrate and adapt to the new cultural expectations, because Yoruba culture is sort of very traditional in terms of its views about the role of women and the role of men and the role of children. And I suppose in many ways it was perhaps what might have been experienced here in the Victorian era, where children were meant to be seen, not heard. And I was coming from this background where I'd had a voice, where I could ask questions, and I was used to that norm. So when I now found myself in this environment where I spoke when my elders had not asked me a question, or I sort of refused to do things because I didn't see the point of them, I found myself getting into a lot of trouble. And my father was an only child, so his mother came to live with us with a lot of extended family, because that's the way the culture works. There's no sort of there's no social security system. So your family, in a sense, are your support system. If you're well-to-do, it is a cultural expectation that you will help others. And indeed, I was to find out years later that other people had helped my father to be able to make that journey to the United Kingdom to gain the qualifications he gained. So in his return, the expectation was that he would also help other members of the extended family. So a lot of people came to live with us. And I went from living in England with my foster family, having my own bedroom and my own things and toys and all that stuff, to living in I think our first apartment was a 1-bedroom apartment. I mean, the rooms were large, but I found myself sleeping on a mat on the floor in the living room. I found myself going to school. And once I outgrew my first pair of shoes, I had to walk barefoot. So it was a very big difference in terms of the standard of living, as well as the culture shock. And I struggled to adapt all my life. So I was constantly in trouble.
What was going on in your head at the time? Such a small child going through such a big change. What's going on in your head at the time?
I think initially the excitement of everything new overwhelms you. So it was kind of exciting, meeting all these Black relatives that I didn't know. Every one of them called me a different name because I was my parents' eldest and my dad was an only child. So that essentially, to my grandmother, I was her second child. Everywhere I went, I had a different name, literally, which was fascinating. And the vibrancy of the culture, all of that was exciting at first. Because when we went back, it was the tail end of the Nigerian Civil War. So my father homeschooled me for the better part of a year. But once I started to go to school and I had to then walk barefoot and I started to face all these challenges. And by then my parents had got jobs. My grandmother was in charge. And my grandmother's view, I suspect, was that I would not make a good African wife with my behaviors and my attitudes. So she started a correction course and I just became more rebellious. So at that point, my focus then shifted. And for me, it was all about how do I get out of this situation, get back to England. And that would drive me for years and years and years to come. So in a sense, that was my kind of response once I got into that position where life became really hard. And I just hated the situation I found myself in. My grandmother was the matriarch. She kind of ruled the family. And so my parents had, it's not that they had limited say, but I suspect they didn't know enough about what was going on. And I was astute enough to know that my grandmother held the power. So there was a limit to what I shared about what was going on when my parents were at work, when they weren't around. But I was mouthy. I got my own back on her that way. So basically, it was a battle between myself and my grandmother until I went to secondary school.
Do you think it's because you spent a few years in England? Is that why you were a bit different in a good way, mouthy, as you say? Is that the not the main reason, but maybe one of the reasons?
I suspect it's actually the main reason because a lot of the child's personality is formed in those very early years. And I spent those first 6 years of my life in an environment where I was relatively free to be. I was loved. My foster parents, I know that there are some of those children who were abused, who were treated badly. I was one of the fortunate ones. My foster family loved me and I knew I was loved. So I had that happy childhood. It was a happy place for me. And so throughout my childhood and growing up, England was home. England was the happy place. As far as I was concerned, living in Africa, I was an alien, literally. I just could not get my head around a lot of the things they believed, even though I was still very young. The older I got, the more I became disconnected with culture and the culture's values and expectations. Don't get me wrong, I do not disregard all of them. There are lots of African values that actually ended up being instilled in me. Whether I wanted those or not, but they became part of me. And I still value those. And I carry those through into my own parenting with my own children. But I was almost like it's not a nice word to say half-breed, but that's how I kind of felt, that I was neither one nor the other. I had these two different identities. But the problem with them was that they were constantly in conflict with each other. So if you've ever lived between two cultures, you find you need to switch if you're going to fit in either one. And I struggled to switch into the Yoruba cultural paradigm. I did because I had to survive, and I'm a survivor. But it always came at a cost, both in terms of your emotions, how you feel, and in some ways physical costs, because my grandmother's method of discipline was physical, and I had to endure that for years.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I think when it comes to parenting, you have that African part of you as well that I don't get. Just when you said it now, Florence, it just clicked. Why is it so different for us sometimes to be on the same page?
Every culture has its historical kind of remnants.
Yeah, but you grew up in London.
No, but even still, my family are very much, they're very religious, very from an African cultural background, traditional cultural background. And I never felt it was ever a situation where I couldn't talk, where I couldn't voice my opinions and things. Don't get me wrong, and we do it with the kids and stuff. There's certain levels of what you can and what you can't say. I'm very big on manners, how you kind of treat, not just how you treat your elders, but how you treat people in general, how you speak to people, you being mindful of what you're saying and stuff to people matters, and trying to instill that going forward. Whatever they do in their lives and things, if they understand that, words have meaning and power and stuff behind them, they need to understand how that can affect going forward. And that I definitely feel that I learned from my mum and dad and brothers and sisters. I'm the youngest and things. And there's a big there's a big gap between me and my next brother and things. But I learned that quite early on and stuff. And there was something you mentioned about the switching. And I feel that this doesn't directly compare to your experience and things, but you find yourself in moments where, in order to kind of deal or, kind of react and be involved in something, sometimes you might have to kind of switch. If I'm having a conversation with some of my mates as such, I'm not having that same conversation with my work colleagues, or some of them work colleagues, but I'm not having that same conversation in a professional environment and things, because the two wouldn't mix. Mm. But you mentioned something about, and I was really curious about this, how you felt that your upbringing affected your parenting with yourself and your husband. I still can't believe, what was it, 43 years?
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that.
Wow. Don't worry. We've got a bit of time to go, so we need some advice and stuff on that one. But yeah, no.
Yeah. With the parenting thing, while we lived in Africa, I think my parenting was very African. My husband, it's an interesting thing. My husband was also fostered.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
We met at a party.
Yeah.
When I was in my late teens, and it was just the connection, apart from the physical attraction, was this shared experience of having been fostered.
Absolutely.
For the first time, I was meeting someone who saw the world through the same eyes, and the things that marked me as different within my family. Suddenly, there was somebody else who was just like me. If that makes any sense?
Absolutely.
I was a more vocal renegade. He was one of the quiet ones. He just went away and did whatever he wanted to. and men in that society had a little bit more leeway than women would, because as far as a woman's role was concerned, it was all about being a good wife and staying married and not getting a divorce. And I grew up with a constant litany at the back of my ear that I wouldn't be able to stay married. I grew up with family constantly reminding me that with my behaviors, I was a candidate for divorce and I'll be a family disgrace. Jesus. So that was a constant message that I was getting from extended family, not my parents. But remember, wherever we lived, within a few weeks, my parents attracted family like honey,
Yeah.
That's probably because of they were the most affluent, even though they weren't affluent. They were the most affluent within the extended family. Mm. And still that colonial mentality about, if you've been to Britain, you would just streets ahead of everybody else, regardless of your financial means. So, they family would move near us, so that their support system was there. So I constantly had uncles and aunties in and out of my life, and I never got on with any of them. And that didn't change after I got married either. So with my husband, that connection was really strong. So in some ways, we were very close in terms of our ideals about parenting. And it was very clear from the onset that the one thing that we'd suffered from, that lack of a voice, was not going to be the way we raised our kids. But interestingly enough, while we still lived in Nigeria, although we weren't harsh, our behavior management systems and structures were still what was the expected norm. So when we moved to Britain, we had to modify that. But also, we suddenly, our children, there were lots of things we did that we hadn't questioned that were cultural. Because we'd given our children a voice, they challenged us constantly in those. And
backfired.
To rethink. So a typical example is we kind of grew up, when you prepared food within a large extended African family, the male head of the family got the biggest portion of food. Because we were growing up and we weren't affluent, that my father, for instance, would have the larger pieces of meat went to dad. Then the next two, and for every meal you served, there'll be something starchy. There'll be the stew and the fufu, the type of
making me hungry. I'm coming round for dinner and stuff soon. I'll be round in 10 minutes. But God, sorry, apology. I didn't mean to cut you off.
So there'll be the food, there'll be the two pieces of meat, and by the time it filtered down to us kids, there'll be four of us sharing one piece of meat. So we didn't get a lot of protein. It was more of the starch and the vegetables. And then I remember once, and I continued doing that even after we moved here. And we could afford, it wasn't that I couldn't afford it, it was just an ingrained cultural norm that sometimes people don't question why they do things they do. Until my kids said to me, how come you get larger pieces of meat? We're the ones who are still growing and need the protein. And we were suddenly there thinking, yeah. It's like, why are you doing that? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense in the African context because, one, you respected your elders. So it was a very hierarchical society, very top down. And I dare say in those days, they weren't informed about children's nutrition and stuff like that. And even though my parents had, been educated outside, that education was a brief period. And to be fair, they weren't actually our caregivers in that period anyway. So when they went back, they defaulted to their own norm when they were growing up. And in the same way, we did that until our kids started saying, what are you doing that for? That doesn't make any sense. So there was some learning that we needed to do when we moved back here to live with the kids, because our oldest kid then was 8 years old, same age as your twins now. So, they were able to sort of say, well, hang on a minute, Mum and Dad, you're not making any sense here. And so we did have to modify that. Another example, when my children sort of reached their teenage years and wanted to start going out, they wanted to start going to pubs, and, the traditional African family, you lock them down. And I had two were daughters. And so they'd want to go to a pub or they'd want to go somewhere else, and I'd say no. And then suddenly it occurred to me one day that the only reason I was saying no was because I was told no when I was 17. There was no other explanation than that. And then I stopped and I thought to myself, okay, so apart from that, there were other concerns, and my anxiety was about protecting my daughters.
Yeah.
My daughters were teenagers in the era when there was you may have heard of this story, there was this black cab driver in London. We lived, in Southwark, and that he was a serial rapist.
I think,
I've heard the story. I mean, it took years before they ever caught him, but for a long time, you weren't even safe in a taxi. You weren't, So there were anxieties about, and then in those days, I think Rohypnol, the date rape drug, was new on the scene. And so your anxiety is about a parent. So once I worked through that personally, that, okay, why am I saying no? Partly because I was told no, partly because of their safety. So what safety measures can we put in place? So I began to get my children to take responsibility for their own health and their own health and their well-being. So we had a plan. We only use a female-only cab. In those days, there were no mobile phones. So what we did was BT had this number that you can give out to people, family, and they could reverse call without having to pay for it. So little things like that we put in place, go out in a group, don't go out as a single girl so that you stay safe. All those things. So once I started to process that, I was able to let go and give them a lot more freedom than I had at the same age. But I have to say that cultural upbringing was always there in the background. And so I was always having to push through and change and think about what I was doing and actually ask myself, where's this coming from?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is it just culture for culture's sake? Is this something that needs to change because we're in a different environment? Mm-hmm. And it's that lesson, and in a way, I started to then translate that into my professional work, because as a head teacher, which I was by that time, I was in a school in Southwark that I suspect that 90% of the Black children were from a similar background. So I had to start working with their parents to sort of get them to modify their parenting. Otherwise, we were raising these children who were caught between cultures, just like I had been.
Yeah. it's funny because when you mentioned around saying no for the sake of saying no, and I think I do that. I think I do that on certain occasions.
But you have me to remind you.
Oh yeah, you remind me often, and that's
a good thing.
No,
yeah,
that's good. Like, that's a good thing.
Balance,
Because there are more times and stuff now that I am kind of thinking to myself, actually, why am I kind of saying no? But I still feel that they're at their age and stuff where they still need to learn about gratitude for what they kind of have. And not everything is going to be yes. But even if it's not a yes, it's still okay, because it's not always a no. It may be, understand that it might be a no for now, but you've got the option and stuff, but they still need to be happy with that.
Yeah. It's about a healthy balance. Yeah? If they don't feel like they have a no all the time, then they'll be happy with the no. But if it was always a no, then that's not.
And this is probably where I need to communicate a little bit more. Sorry, I don't mean to take away from this. We're
counselling session for us.
I honestly feel that in certain cases, there's certain things that they do, and you see that they've got it, they've understood that. And then, so the no that necessarily would have been a no, I try to kind of take back. So my thinking is fairly long term of, okay, I will retract this back as I see you kind of take more responsibility and understand, and, and it takes time. They're still young, right? But as they do that, then my thinking is I don't need to say no, because I know that they've got in their head that if I do X and X, there is either consequence or this, I'm going to, I'll deal with something and stuff with this. And so they've made an informed judgment on that. And that's my thinking. But maybe
I think you overcomplicate it. They don't think that way.
No, but they don't need to think that way and stuff now. I'm feeling that I will deal with that and stuff. I'll take that on now, but I will relieve that as they get to the point where they naturally will just kind of get the clicks. Okay. And I'll hopefully, but I need communication. I need to communicate a bit more with them in order to do that.
Do you resonate with this, Florence? Does it make sense what Yao just said?
Yeah, I think it does, in the sense that as parents, and especially when you've got a strong moral core, you want your children to be able to make informed decisions.
Yeah.
And those, I mean, if you had a child who had no, what's the right word here? If they were not able to delay gratification and always took whatever they wanted, whatever the cost. Because if a child learned from a very young age that whatever they want, they got.
Yeah.
If they're in a situation where suddenly that's not easily accessible, the chances are they will take, even if it's not theirs. Yeah. So sometimes when we say no to our children, it's because we want them to learn that ability to sort of say, I can wait for that. Perhaps it might be better for me to save up and buy that rather than go get a credit card I can't really afford and max it out.
Yeah.
Or sometimes when we say no, it's to get them to develop those skills that are going to serve them later on in the future. And then sometimes when we say no, it's because we can see ahead. They can't see all the ramifications of taking that action through. And we can because of our experience, because we're grown-ups. And sometimes actually explaining that, because I mean, I've got a granddaughter who is 10 going on 60.
Yeah.
The world to her is just this wonderful place. And at the moment, her views are that adults have it all because they can make decisions. I see a bit of myself in that. They
brilliant.
Yeah.
It's not fair. They get to decide everything that happens to you. Who are they to do that? But she can't see the dangers. She can't see, beyond what she wants at the moment. So, her parents' challenge is helping her to understand that actually sometimes when we make these decisions, it's not because we don't love you or we just want to be mean.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's actually not good for you, even though you can't see that right now. It's a bit like, food is lovely. but you wouldn't want your child to eat nonstop throughout the day because that has health implications
Exactly.
and social implications. But from their perspective, this thing tastes wonderful. Give me more.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Feel alive in black and white.
I thank you so much for putting that into words that make a lot more sense than what I was saying. But I do not want my children, or I do not want our children, not to have a voice. I absolutely want them, and I need them to be able to sit around and say what they need to say and be confident in what they need to say.
They are.
If you meet my brothers and sisters, in that aspect of being able to voice what we need to say, our parents did a great job and things.
100%.
There's no two ways about it.
We don't have that in our culture at all. We are more like, shut up and just fit in, just blend in. Don't be different. Don't be, that's our culture more.
No,
which is awful. I prefer yours.
We need them to be able to kind of voice and, find the words and stuff, whether it's in the, whatever language and stuff that is, finding that voice and being able to kind of say what you have in there is so much the battle of so many and stuff from lots of cultures and stuff that there is. But okay, I won't carry on. I could just carry on.
No, let's go back to your story.
Please,
so when did you come back to the UK? How old were you? And how did it happen?
Right. Well, my husband and I got to a point where work-wise for him, he was still struggling with challenges to do with different cultural expectations. We were struggling within the wider family because with the two of us together, we were able to resist some of those cultural norms even more, but extended family were not very happy about that. So and around the same time, my siblings, I'm the eldest in my family. My husband is the second in his. My younger siblings, who are twins, those born immediately after me, they had come back to the UK. And remember my brother writing me a letter saying there's a real teacher shortage here. So it might be a good time if you want to come.
Yeah.
So we hadn't planned it. It was literally a spur of the moment kind of decision that, things don't seem to be working out here. We were both British citizens by birth.
Yeah, right.
So should we emigrate? And we decided that, okay, I'll come for a 6-week summer break, stay with my siblings. And if I got a job in that period, we'll take it as a sign that it was meant to be. And that's exactly what happened. So when we came back, my husband was in his mid-30s. I was in my sort of early mid-20s.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And did you get in touch with your foster parents then?
Now that's an interesting one because my father had made sure that we never lost contact.
Oh, that's amazing.
He made that promise to us because my foster mum came to visit me at my parents just before we boarded the ship to come back to go back to Nigeria. And my dad had promised that he'll make sure we maintain contact. Sometimes, the letters were sporadic, particularly during the Civil War. Sometimes I get 3, a year's worth of letters in one go. But throughout the entire period, we were in touch. And then when I was 17, my father paid for me to come and spend the entire summer with them.
Oh, wow.
So I came, but then I'd met my husband-to-be. My father made sure that I was at the end of so I was about to start my final year of my teacher training.
Yeah.
The extended family, I told him that if he let me come earlier, I wouldn't come back. Because his initial promise was that he'd let me come after I finished my GCSE equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
But he reneged on that promise.
Yeah.
I had to wait another 2 years before I came. So I was 17 when I visited my foster family. And then when we came back, we made contact again, and they met my husband and my kids. And then I got really bad at maintaining contact. In the first few years of being back and trying to set up our family here were tough years.
Yeah.
And so you're just engrossed in daily living and survival and raising the kids and coping with the job and all the different cultural expectations here. And so I wasn't very good at making contact. And then I phoned one day and found out that my foster mom had passed away.
Oh.
So yeah, my foster dad had passed away before we came back with the kids.
Yeah.
But he was alive when I came when I was 17.
But you got a chance to... Oh. We were talking to someone just the other day, and what they do for a job and stuff, it's so kind of out there. And the person in question is fairly young, and I kind of thought to myself, would I ever consider doing this? But the gist of what I'm trying to get at is there's so many stories that are so powerful for the growth of, everyone around us. Your story that you're kind of telling here, and, the things that you've kind of been through, it's so kind of inspiring for people who think that they have a hard life, or going through something. But you understand that, you know what, however life is, there's always a means and a way to kind of move forward. I'm not saying it's always easy. So it's clearly never always easy, but there is something there. You may not know it, but a story of someone else can inspire you to do that, to move, take that next step and the next step. And it's amazing.
But Florence transformed, I don't know if it's the right word, her experience into your first book, isn't it?
Yes. I started writing that in 2005 when I was ahead, and I started to do the work with the children that I was working with and their families. Those children would do certain behaviors in school, and there were completely different children at home because what they were doing was switching. Yeah. But there were some children who were not switching, and then there were some children who were playing the system. So they'll do things in school they'll never do at home. And when you call the parents in and you say, hang on a minute, your child did this, and that's not my child. So you don't do that. So I started working with parents, and I found whenever I shared my story, a lot of people said, oh, you should write about that. So I started writing in 2005. But because of the job and the nature of the job, I just found that the only time I could write was during the long summer holidays. And by the time I'd written a chapter or two, it was time for the holidays were over. So I just wrote a little bit every year for 15 years. And then COVID happened. And by then I become what in my job is called a school advisor. And I couldn't go into schools because everybody was on lockdown. And I thought, you know what, this is the time to finish this book. I just knuckled down and got it done. And I was very fortunate that around the same time, sadly, the Black Lives Matters movement, because of the incident in America. And I think publishers were actually asking themselves how diverse their authors and were. So there were more doors open at that point. And so I was able to get a publisher, and that's how Coconut came out. And it just details that journey of being born here, going through that experience, the struggles I had in Nigeria, the struggles I had when I came back, in terms of fitting in, and the sort of subtle racism that is embedded within the system that is not obvious until you push and prod, and then how I got to that point where I started thinking actually beyond myself. I'd kind of gotten over my own issues, and it was now about giving back to my community and supporting people who were walking that journey that I'd walked before.
We obviously leave the link to the book, both books, in the description.
Thank you.
But let's talk about your second book, The Stolen Daughter.
Yes.
And how it's connected to the big family secret that came out.
Yes. Well, while I was in the sort of final stages of editing Coconut, I can't actually remember what it was, but I had a question. Something came up, and so I went to my mother to sort of ask her about it, and it was just something she said in a very casual way, almost as if she thought I knew about it, but what she'd implied was that what I'd believed about a part of my family. And I deliberately still keep that part of the family a secret because there are other members of the extended family who actually still don't know the secret.
Okay.
And essentially, a part of my family had been taken into slavery during the Yoruba civil wars.
Wow.
And they were prisoners of war, but then they ended up in the domestic slavery situation.
Mm.
And that heritage then affected relationships and the dynamics between relationships. I was 59 and I was finding this out first time. And it meant that because as a child, you sort of look at dynamics. There's an uncle there, there's an auntie there. So who's that person in the family? How do they fit in? And I kind of roughly knew how everybody fit in. But we noticed this gap and said, well, why don't we have any other family members on that side? And we've been given this very long, convoluted story about a family falling out and a breakaway. But that story had been given to us to hide the truth that person's heritage was in slavery. And that's why we don't know anybody from that side of the family. So it just got me thinking about how we know a lot about the slavery experience in the Americas and, what happened to those people who were taken out of Africa during those 300-400 years when the transatlantic slave trade was at its highest. But we don't know much about what happened to those who were taken but ended up in the domestic market. And around the same time that I had that conversation with my mum, I also read an article that had been written by somebody who was a Nigerian scholar, who'd talked about the fact that actually there were people, because around the same time in the UK, if you remember the Colston statue and, the toppling in Bristol, that article was talking about the fact that there are people in Nigeria who've got statutes to their name who were actual slave traders. And I remember at school learning about some of these people. Two of them were women. They were extremely rich women, extremely powerful women, and they'd been slave traders. That wealth came from slavery. And because I've always loved history, I studied history at university, it got me thinking about, what life had been like for my ancestor who'd been caught in this situation through no fault of their own. And that's what gave birth to my second book, which is a historical novel. So it's set in 1880s. And what I've done is I've got these two real historical figures as the background to the story of my main character. So it's historical fiction. So my main character is fictional, and all the interactions in the story are fictional. But I've based it on real historical events. At the time, it was the dawn of colonization. And the power struggle that was happening in the royal family in Lagos, in Nigeria, which was to eventually lead to British intervention in the local politics and eventually to Britain annexing Lagos. And once they got hold of Lagos, getting into the hinterland of Nigeria was so much easier. And before we knew it, Nigeria was a colony.
How did it feel to write this? Both books, actually.
Writing Coconut was cathartic. I didn't realize how much until I got to the very end. I remember that when I read it from the beginning to the end and I got to the end, I just burst out in tears and I didn't know why I was crying. And it happened twice more. So that was a really interesting experience because I don't cry often. And it was a technique that I developed very early in life in order to cope with the struggles of living within that environment. And it was part of my defiance that, you can beat me as much as you want, but I'm not going to cry. It was just who I was. But I just found myself weeping uncontrollably at the end of that process of editing Coconut. So I suppose I was getting some of that trauma out. And writing The Stolen Daughter was a more interesting experience because I'd never written fiction before. So I was learning as I was writing. But also I needed to research, and one of the feedback, I'm glad I did it, because one of the consistent feedback that I get on The Stolen Daughter is that the audience can really immerse themselves in the setting.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about pre-colonial Africa. There are not many written accounts of what went on then, because the Africans, mostly had an oral tradition, apart from the Islamic North, where they had a written tradition with Arabic. Further down into sort of equatorial Africa, it was more oral traditions passed down, word of mouth, song, family history, and stuff like that. So in order to get at the information I actually ended up reading the early accounts of the early missionaries and the early explorers. Yeah, I found particularly the language used by the explorers was very derogatory in terms of how they described the Africans, their way of life. It was very Victorian, very superior.
Yeah.
And I had to stomach that, and I literally had to shelve my emotions and just see, this is a task I need to get through. I need to get the information I need. But what was interesting was afterwards, after I'd finished writing, I just suddenly found this incredible well of anger inside me that I didn't know what to do with, because I wouldn't consider myself an angry person. Because of the kind of life I've had, most of the time I'm like, yeah, it's a hardship, get over it, move on. But this time I just did not know what to do with all this anger I had inside me. And it kind of coincided with a long planned trip. I'd always wanted to visit Australia and New Zealand. And 2023 had been a very difficult year for me for health reasons. So we'd planned to go to Australia and New Zealand 2024, and it was almost like a reward to myself. We've been planning it a long, long time, but everything just came together. So off we went to Australia and New Zealand, and we landed in Australia in the same week as there was celebrating Australia Day.
Okay.
Which to Europeans is the day that Captain Cook set down in Australia, but which to the Aborigines was their invasion day.
Yeah, exactly.
So there was a lot of angst in the press about it, depending on which side of the coin you stood. And that kind of fueled my anger. And throughout the trip, everywhere we went, it was Captain Cook this and Captain Cook that. And I just got to the point where I was really tired of hearing about it.
Yeah.
So I had to process that, and I had to get over it. And it took a while before I got to the point where I was like, okay, it happened again, get over it. But yeah, I didn't expect that. It was a bit of a surprise in terms of how, just because I had to do research, I ended up with this mental turmoil, all this anger, which I didn't know what to do with. I've processed it now, and I'm okay.
If you had a student or a loved one who had to kind of deal with that anger, I know this was your personal journey, and you had to kind of find a way to kind of manage it and things. Is there anything that you would turn around and offer as a bit of advice? I'm not saying it from the point of, you're a psychologist or, anything on that.
Personal.
Yeah, but from a personal view.
I think it depends on who you are and how you process things. For instance, my daughter's a writer, and she's a successful writer. And she was writing something that required a little bit of information about that period as well. And I signposted her to some of my readings, but I also I put a warning on it. And she read a few lines and she said, I can't do that, Mum. And she put it aside. She said she would be able to handle reading that. If you can't compartmentalize, then I would suggest read at your own peril, because it's hard to get past that. I can, because I can be I don't want to use a swear word, but I can be very persistent when I want to get at something. What I didn't realize was that it would have a knock-on impact later on. that caught me by surprise. So in hindsight now that I know that is something that I can be prepared for and perhaps deal with the emotions as I'm experiencing them, rather than let it store up into a bank that I don't know what to do with.
I hope you don't take this in, hopefully it's not negative. I mean it from a very positive. You so remind me of my mum and my sister.
Me too, a little bit, yeah.
Because you know how I was saying, like my family, they're very articulate, but they're also very
warm.
They're powerful in the words and stuff that they use.
Yeah.
You know, your ability then that you said, you know, you in order to get to the truth, you had to go through the pain of reading and, you know, processing all those things and stuff, but you just kept going. And I love that. If there's anything that we can teach our children and stuff is
face your fears, face the darkness.
Yeah. And
to get through it.
It's okay, because the person that you become at the end of it gives you so much more. We hide behind, you know, a lot of things and stuff these days because it's too much to take on. But okay, sometimes your journey might take a bit longer, but that's still okay. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's been an honor to have you here, Florence. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Just to ease off a bit, let's finish off with the marriage. 43 years?
Yes.
You know what? Me and Yao, we have been together for 8 years. 8?
Married.
Yeah, married. And it's hard not to kill him. So as much as I love him, it's so hard. How do you do it?
I mean, yeah, like any relationship, we have our ups and downs.
Yeah, of course.
And we have these periods of relative calm, and then we have these big eruptions.
Yeah,
absolutely. But we recognize this, the cycles now. So I think it's partly our faith. We're both Christians, and we believe when we took our vows, we were taking those vows before a higher being. So the vows go beyond ourselves. They're covenants that we have between each other, but also between myself and my maker, and between him and his maker. There is no relationship that doesn't require hard work.
Yeah,
true.
When you think you know yourselves inside out, and I think given that I've spent, you know, 2/3 of my life so far with this man, I know him well and he knows me well. But we're constantly evolving beings, and so we constantly change, and sometimes that change doesn't happen at the same time, and that's where the rub comes. Especially with modern life, you get really busy, you're getting off. We all have a slightly different part of our lives that is just ours, and I think those things change us as we move. So in my experience, the rub tends to come from there, where I've grown in a certain direction and he's grown in a certain direction. And then we come back and suddenly realize that actually we're going in different directions, you know, we then come back. But I think the biggest thing that holds us together is that covenant, that actually we made a commitment.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You're still going to have issues, you know.
Yeah. I like it, that this approach that you just take it as it is. Of course, there will be hard times, and that's okay. Don't expect it to be easy or happy moments all the time. And I think that's partially you win when you just admit that and acknowledge it.
And I also think that there should be some times when you can go back to whoever married you and say, can you add some extra words or messages into those vows? But if you can't do that, then like you said, compromise and think, no, seriously. No, it's...
Humor helps, for sure.
Helps a lot. Absolutely.
It's really interesting because my husband and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. And I remember one of our close friends coming up to me and saying to me, so what's different this time around?
Yeah.
This time around, I know what I'm doing.
I love that. Let's do that.
Yeah.
The 10th anniversary. I love that.
Aww.
This time I know who I'm actually marrying.
Right.
And if I still do it then, that's great. That's true love, you know.
Okay. And if I bring a book with a lot of things and stuff in, we know where we're going.
Like Sheldon, no?
Yeah.
The agreements,
yeah.
You know, like a contract. Thank you so much for listening. if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone you think would like it too, because this has been very, very eye-opening on many levels. So I'm sure the more people this episode will reach, the better. And also, please leave us a review. Leave us a review if you haven't already, because it really helps to get this podcast discovered.
Get the message out.
Yes. Thank you so much, and see you in 2 weeks.